whoever is listening, welcome back. My name is Grayson Mann, and welcome to a Friday podcast edition. Today, I am joined by Larry Williams. He's a sports writer for Clemson Rivals, one of the top networks if you're looking for recruiting, college football news. Larry Williams is one of the pinnacles of the Clemson beat writer community, and he's got a lot of information. Broke the Garrett Riley story most recently. We'll get into that. So, Larry, welcome to the show. Thank you for doing this, man.
Thanks. I appreciate the kind words. You're biased though, because you work for the site. So
Yeah, it's not often you get to interview your boss for a podcast, but we're trying things out.
yeah, man, glad to be here.
Yeah, so as I do with all my interviews, and just kind of with people who don't normally know who you are, we have an audience all across the country. We're just thankful so much each and every day for the support you continue to pour on the podcast, guys. But Larry, kind of just introduce the audience to what your role is through a Clemson beat writer with Rivals, just what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I have been covering Clemson on a daily basis since 2004, when I left the Augusta Chronicle newspaper and joined the Charleston Post and Courier, which wanted to establish a beat writer on site as opposed to their previous method was one of their reporters or one or a couple of their reporters would travel to and from and to Clemson, to and from Clemson. Sorry, the words are a little jumbled, but a few times a week, which was, it's always better when you have somebody sort of boots on the ground. And they had somebody in Columbia covering the Gamecocks for a few years previous to that, so they wanted to sort of balance it out. And then in 2008 is when I moved to TigerIllustrated.com, and of course have been there ever since. The day-to-day job, I was actually just trying to explain it to my daughter yesterday, my 10th grader. She said, so what, I told her I had just finished an article for Friday. So the conversation was on Wednesday, and she said, well, how long does it take you to write an article? And I said, well, 30 minutes, 30 or 45 minutes, not very long. And she said, is that all you have to do for that one day? And so not really. I mean, there's so much that goes into it when you have to write something every day. I mean, literally, I think there's something on our site from me every 365 days of a year. And so that doesn't mean I'm working every day necessarily, because during the sort of the downtimes, the summer, and sometimes in the spring, even kind of right now, when there's nothing really going on football wise, I can plan ahead and get stuff done in advance. And so hopefully, ideally, maybe take a Friday off followed by the weekend off. But it's certainly not a 9 to 5. I could get something could happen, when I least expect it. And then that turns everything upside down, because I have to drop everything and cover that story. The most recent example, of course, would be the firing of Brandon Streeter and the hiring of Garrett Riley. Luckily, over the years, Clemson hasn't fired many coaches, so there haven't been many coaching searches. Like, it's really extraordinary. What as I'm thinking about it, since I started covering Clemson in 2004, football has made one head coaching change, that being Tommy Bowden out and Dabo Sweeney in October of 2008. They've made one basketball coaching change since I've covered Clemson, and that being when Oliver Purnell left for DePaul and Brad Brownell got hired, and then 2 baseball coaching changes. Fired Jack Leggett 6 years ago, and then fired Monty Lee last year, and brought in Eric Bakich. And so, but then of course with football, anytime there's an assistant coaching search, I mean, that's all hands on deck, and everybody of course wants to know about that, but there haven't been many of those either.
Yeah,
Um,
it's the continuity for Clemson sports, at least since you've been covering and I've been just kind of paying attention to it. It's been phenomenal the way they've been able to kind of maintain a like consistency. There's like a brand for Clemson that I feel they find the right guy and they stick with them, and it's been
yeah.
pretty consistent throughout the years. But you mentioned that most recent situation with Garrett Riley, and I think the most fascinating part of it, especially with me being on the phone with you, as I think the news, if you can tell me if I'm wrong, as the news breaks, you go, well, I think I have to go or something. And so I'm in the like this in the dark spot, and I get a bunch of texts that the news starts going, and I start put two and two together. So can you kind of walk the audience through that process of how the source came to you, the information, and what that process really transforms into, especially when the coaching search, as you mentioned, was relatively quick and finding the guy that was going to replace Streeter, which with many are calling a home run hire.
Well, so I guess I have to sort of paint the picture leading up to that,
Mm-hmm.
and when you're trying to cover a team and trying to sort of present yourself as somebody who is somewhat of an authority on what is happening, and when a season sort of turns kind of sour to an extent late, especially offensively, as it did, in some respects defensively as well. With first year coordinators, you get drugged up and down the field against Notre Dame. You commit the unpardonable sin of losing at home to South Carolina, and then you score one touchdown against Tennessee in the Orange Bowl. Your guard has to be up, and so part of that for me is this is weeks before Dabo actually made the decision. It's basically talking to people who are in position to know, to get a feel for, hey, do you think he's going to make changes to his staff? And the consistent word that I heard was no. Um, but it was sort of ominous that week because you started to hear some chatter. I think as we wrote, there was a meeting, a staff meeting the previous Saturday. I think all this happened on a Thursday. So there was a staff meeting the previous Saturday that it just did not sound like it was very rosy from Dabo's perspective, and so it was just kind of ominous. And then I had heard at that point, that he had made a couple of support staff changes, but nothing that would really warrant the tone of ominousness coming out like of that meeting. And so well, what else could there be? I didn't think he was gonna. I thought he was gonna stand pat with Streeter and Goodwin. Well, as it turned out, it moved pretty quickly, like you said. I think my understanding of it was that he figured out that he might actually have a chance at Garrett Riley, somebody who I probably wouldn't have thought that he would have had much of a chance at, and he probably didn't think he had much of a chance at, because I think the conventional wisdom was that Garrett was the next coaching step for Riley was going to be to a head coach position, and so I believe that the decision to make a change at coordinator was made because of the ability to land Riley. And so that process, of course, 2 days before, 3 days before, um, TCU had played in the national championship, and so obviously things started to move on that Tuesday. So 48 hours, I guess, is the sort of capsule of time in which it happened. Um, but as to how I was able to get the information, I tell people that, man, there's no set way that you come across information. It happens in such different ways. Um, I kind of laugh every time something big happens and I'm really busy trying to figure out, the next step or something, or trying to nail down the story, but it's out there. I have texts from 50 different people, friends, saying, "Hey man, what's the inside story? What's going on?" And And I'm like, man, I promise y'all, I'm not just sitting there like, just waiting for people to tell me
Right.
something. Like I'm actively on the phone and busy, like really as busy as I ever am during those times. And so, it's hard for me to respond to to people, to friends and such when something like that happens. But in this case, it wasn't like I got some text from the football office saying, "Hey, he just fired Brandon
Yeah.
Streeter." It was more. It was sort of a. I had heard that I'd heard from somebody who wasn't even inside the program that, some information that gave me good reason to believe that something had happened. And so that's when I start calling people who are in position to know. It's like, hey, I have this. I'm 95% sure that this is the case. I need some help here in
Yeah.
confirming. So,
The thing
and
that really impressed me the most with the whole situation was just how quick everything came out, and just the fact that Riley on that Monday, on that same week, just rolling from a national championship loss to Georgia that everyone was very familiar with. And then within, it seemed like a really quick timetable, like not even time to kind of process what he had just done. Dabo's on the phone. He's being uncharacteristically aggressive with what was going on. Is that something you classify it as uncharacteristic of him? And the way you kind of worded it, would it have been Riley or bust, or was there potentially another candidate? Like a lot of words like Jeff Scott was thrown around from the time of the Carolina game, Notre Dame. That was a popular phrase. Garrett Riley never even kind of crossed into Clemson fans' minds until it was official, and people go, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." So, was that something that was thrown around with Jeff Scott's name when things are kind of developing or the season kind of progresses, or was it really just a hey, we have an opportunity to get a guy that can really change how the offense has been run, change the success of this program? If it hadn't been Garrett, is it fair for me to say if it hadn't been Garrett Riley, we'd be talking about a completely different conversation with Streeter in year two?
I think so. Yeah. And Jeff Scott, like it will not surprise me at all if he's eventually back on the staff in some capacity. I would doubt he'd be on the field. But it was bizarre to me how right when the Riley stuff is popping, that you have all this speculation out there and even some reports that, oh, Jeff Scott's back too. And well, what a masterful move by Dabo to not hire just Garrett Riley, but to bring in Jeff Scott to help fix the machine on offense. I just never heard that. And late in the season after Jeff got fired at South Florida, did some checking around, and the vibe that I got then was distinctly that Jeff was going to take some time off and be with his family, move back to the Clemson area, back home, and to just benefit from the luxury of the contract that he signed that put him in a really good financial situation to, for the first time in his life, just sit back, decompress, and put the full focus on his family. And that's, as I sit here today, that's the understanding that I have about his immediate future. And so I don't think Jeff was ever in the picture in terms of a possible offensive coordinator. And in
Yeah.
fact, man, that would be hard. You talk about that's one thing that I don't think people think enough about. Um, Jeff, these coaches are like part of family for him, and so you hear people say, Dabo needs to fire Tyler Grisham or demote him and bring in Jeff to coach receivers again. Well, I mean, if you put yourself in Jeff's shoes, like Tyler was under him, like that's just
Mm-hmm.
kind of it's awkward is probably not the word. I mean, awkward at the very least. And then the prospect of firing Brandon Streeter and replacing him with Jeff Scott, like man, that's tough too. So I'm not saying that none of that could have happened conceivably, but I just don't know that people put enough thought into sort of the relationships that are involved here with guys who were part of a really tight knit staff and remain really close with each other. But as far as the aggression goes, No, I don't. Not really that out of the ordinary because I mean, out of the ordinary for sure as far as Dabo's typical, past decision making. But if you have identified a possibility, I mean, yeah, you gotta go for it because time is of the essence. Alabama reportedly might have had some interest in Garrett Riley, and Bill O'Brien was still um, you know employed, still the coordinator there. This was before, of course, the news that he's going back to the NFL. Um, Jimbo Fisher, I think, had made a run at Garrett as well, and he's the hottest name out there, really.
Yeah.
And so you have to be stealthy, you have to be quick. I know that just historically, Dabo, back when he fired Billy Napier after the 2010 season, he did it. He actually made the move after the season ended, but he had been doing legwork on Chad Morris for a while, for I think weeks. And so, I saw, some criticism out there from, I think, I don't know, First Take or something. I don't watch it, but I just saw,
Yeah.
and they're saying this, that, oh, how could he, um, how could he? Some people maybe were incredulous that he could, go after Riley before actually firing Streeter. That's unfair to Streeter, and like that's just kind of funny to me because I mean that's just the nature of the beast, man. That's the business that they're in, and so yeah, you've got to, before you make the call on your current OC, you've got to know who you can get.
Yeah.
And so that's what he did with Chad Morris, and really that's a similar, that's the comparison I think that is really, that's what I think back to. There are so many differences between then and now because I mean, heck, he was coming off a 6-7 season. It was his second season. They had won the Atlantic Division his first year, and even that was considered an accomplishment. There's still a lot of doubt out there that he could be an elite head coach, whereas now, he has 2 national championships in his pocket, 6 straight playoff trips, and he's trying to get back to that. But it is a similar feel from the perspective of, got to find somebody from the outside to help fix the machine. And he goes, Chad Morris from Texas, with a sort of a cutting edge offense, so that they sort of molded into the Clemson offense that Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott oversaw after Morris went to SMU. But I like the decision. I think that I mean, it's kind of unfair for Streeter because he had a 1-year audition
Yeah.
with kind of an emotional roller coaster at quarterback and didn't have T. Higgins or Justin Ross or Mike Williams types at receiver. But I thought they needed a big refresh after the 2021 season. I think a lot of people thought that. And they did have some tweaks and such under Streeter, but as it turns out, a full refresh is probably needed for this offense to sort of rediscover some of its fizz, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way I look at the last 2 years at Clemson and being a part of the student body, I think gave me a unique kind of, because I was seeing it from both sides. There was you go to a press conference on Monday, you're on the couch with your roommates that same night and kind of talking about the same thing, but from a different perspective. And so it was really kind of neat to kind of play both sides. And so I really want to ask you, in these last couple years, and you kind of eliminate the Trevor Lawrence stuff, you start with the Georgia game and you end with Tennessee with Cade Klubnik. And I just kind of put that in a bubble as kind of, might not be the word to use, but more of the, I guess, given the success that they went on from with Deshaun Watson, and you cap it off with the Sugar Bowl appearance and the playoff and the COVID year, 2021 to 2023, ending in the Orange Bowl, kind of the strangest era in Clemson football. What has been your impression of these last 2 years? And maybe if you exclude the Garrett Riley thing, did you like kind of the direction where things were headed? Did you see, even if there wasn't this home run hire, there is a feasible spot back to the playoffs, especially given that there is expansion on the horizon.
Well, I think the last 2 years has given everybody around Clemson, not just fans, but media folks, even maybe some people inside the building, a new appreciation for the fact that, just because the stars aligned in a spectacular and extraordinary way for you to get two generational quarterbacks
Yeah.
within a span of a few years, like most schools don't get one of those quarterbacks in a century.
Yeah.
And Clemson got Deshaun Watson, who came along in 14, and then Trevor Lawrence, who came along 4 years later. And so just because DJ Uyunglele was in that category from a recruiting rankings perspective, and just because Cade Klubnik is in that similar category, it doesn't mean that they're going to be Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. And it just seems absurd to even suggest that at this point, after the
Mm-hmm.
last 2 years. And so, I think that not only have the last 2 years given everyone around here an appreciation for the quarterback position and the meaning of truly elite quarterback play, it also, I think, has given an appreciation for everything that had to come together for them to have the run that they did. It wasn't just five-star quarterbacks. I'm sorry, generational five-star quarterbacks, but it also wasn't just generational five-star defensive tackles, Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, generational five-star receiver, T. Higgins.
Mm-hmm.
It was also not as highly regarded guys elevating and developing into basically guys who would have been five stars if you ranked them retroactively. Mike Williams wasn't even close to a five-star when he signed. He turned into an absolute monster, of course. Hunter Renfrow.
Yeah.
I remember it was the August of 15, so it would have been Hunter Renfrow's redshirt freshman year. He was redshirted in 14, and Dabo let us watch like a week's worth of preseason practice, which was totally out of the ordinary. But I just remember watching these drills where Mackenzie Alexander is covering some guy in a number 13 jersey, some walk on, and I'm like, holy crap, this kid is like taking Mackenzie Alexander to school, play after play. And so my point is, you have guys. That doesn't happen very often. For all of those things to come together, you also had, Wayne Gallman wasn't
Yeah.
a top-notch talent, but he was a tough as nails competitor who grew into a player who was a real asset, and I can go on down the line. And so I think, I remember 2018 or 2019, after the second national title, 44-16, seriously having the conversations, man, could they go 45-0 with Trevor at
Yeah.
quarterback? Could he walk away with 3 straight national titles and undefeated record and all that? And it seemed realistic at the time, and it was somewhat realistic at the time. They got back to the championship the next year, and they didn't get to play TCU. Nothing
Yeah. Right.
against TCU, but
Yeah.
TCU did not have arguably the top offense in college football history that LSU had that year. They got back in 20 and lost to an Ohio State team that was firing on all cylinders and was supremely motivated and had just a fantastic offensive game plan against Brent Venables tactics. And so, again, not that talk was unrealistic, but I think we saw over the next 2 years, even with Trevor Lawrence still here and with Travis Etienne still here, that, hey, it's just not that easy, you know. to run roughshod over everybody who was not as talented as you in the ACC. Things got a little harder. You had more
Yeah.
close games those next 2 years. You had COVID, of course, that threw things out of whack in a way that nobody really envisioned. And then, oh, by the way, you have the teams sort of, you know, really sort of well fortified programs, traditional powers that were trying to get back, you know. And so you had LSU jump up, in 19. You had Ohio State get back and beat them. And then, of course, you have Georgia, that was assembling a powerhouse under Kirby Smart in a way that was not easy to predict circa 2019, 2020. And so, yeah, I think that's a long-winded way of saying the last 2 years have brought us lessons and revelations in a lot of different areas, not just quarterback talent, but talent elsewhere. Um, you know, um, just all those stars having to align and come together for a team to just be an absolute powerhouse that stands, that doesn't really take a back seat to anybody.
Yeah, the fact that you mentioned that 45-0 discussion, I distinctly remember the morning after the national championship. I was in San Francisco listening to, I think it was Colin Cowherd, and the just shock in his voice on the radio from what he had just witnessed the night before was baffling to me because it was still kind of, I was at the game, it was unreal, and you start to like plan out and where they're at and go, okay, they could, and they were close, like you said, they're 29-0. They ran into one of the best teams we'll ever see, I think, college football history, and then ran into Ohio State team that I will always believe they were prepping for Clemson from August, just in terms of the way they had envisioned that season going. So,
Yeah, and even 19, when Clemson outlasted them
yeah,
in the semifinal, Ohio State. I mean, you could argue they were the better team. Like,
yeah,
that was an amazing team. Um, that just had a couple of bounces go the other way. Which happens.
yeah. Just a missed route by Olave, or just a miscommunication, just ends up being in the hands of Nolan Turner, sends them the national championship.
Yeah, or a replay overturn. On the
Yeah,
the just fumble, not fumble. Justin Ross that one of their DBs took back the other way. It was overturned. So
yeah. So I just want to get at least one or two more questions in. And we had previously jumped on this with the Garrett Riley conversation, just how fast the news came to you. So in your time in this industry, has that something that, especially with social media, just how everything kind of comes through the computer, what has been the biggest change in the industry in your line of work since you've been doing this and covering Clemson football or just Clemson sports in general?
yeah, just the immediacy of that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, gosh, like if we go back to 2005 or something, it's like, oh, I've got a big story. Twitter's not there. I'm trying to think. Like, I don't even. I guess we would have gotten it up on our website at the Post and Courier.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have been spending my day writing my story for the next day's newspaper. You know, um, and then you spend the next day. If I do have, if I am fortunate enough to have that story to break that story, then I spend the next day watching everybody else, follow up on it. And they're following up for the next day's papers. So the whole process, uh, the way it moves, is just totally different. Like this, so when I go to Tiger Illustrated in 2008,
Yeah.
very similar to what it is now, and that, hey, we have a website, where that has thousands of subscribers. So of course, get it up now. And so I'm not in this instance with the Garrett Riley thing. I'm literally in the parking lot of a rec center waiting on my girls to finish, their running workouts on the treadmills and inside when all this is happening. And so I'm just, I'm texting my boss when I have it confirmed, Streeter fired, confirmed, get it up now. And so he is composing whatever, the paragraphs and coding and all that to put it in story form. And then I'm also tweeting it, and I'm still on the phone with one of my main contacts as I'm texting boss, tweeting it out, and then this is crazy. My heart almost stopped. So I'm also texting other contacts as I'm on the phone with one of my main contacts, and so I was letting one of my other contacts know, hey, he's been fired, and then contact replies, responds and says, actually, I don't think it's fired. I think he's just been reassigned and he's going to stay on staff. And I'm
Oh
like,
no.
I almost lost it because, man, just to get something wrong like that. But it's
Yeah.
easy. But it's easy to, as you think back to sort of the play-by-play of something like that, it can happen. Like
Hmm.
because it depends on the phrasing of my question as I'm trying to get it confirmed. Like if I say, okay, so is he done? Yes, he's done. Okay. Well, I didn't specifically say, has Brandon Streeter been fired as
Yeah.
his coordinator? And I'm thinking, holy crap, I didn't ask that specific thing. And so I'm on the phone as I get that text saying, actually, I don't think he's been fired. And as I'm on the phone talking to one of the main contacts who does know, I'm like, is he still going to be on the staff? It's like, what?
Oh
Has he
man.
not been fired? Oh yeah, he's been terminated. I'm like, oh, no, of course, not that I'm happy that Brandon Streeter got fired. I was happy that I didn't get the dang thing wrong because the the fear of or the humiliation of getting something wrong far exceeds, or my paranoia far
Yeah.
exceeds the joy or satisfaction that comes out of being first with something.
Yeah.
It's I've just been doing this for too long, and I've gotten stuff wrong before, long time ago, luckily. But the feeling of that is just, man, you just don't ever want to have it.
No. And yeah, and the final question before we wrap up is more of like just kind of wanted to pick your brain a little more. And thank you once again for doing this.
Sure.
Has there been a place or a game, it can be like a moment where you were just kind of it's stuck in your brain? Like there's a for me, it's gotta be Watson to Renfro. I was a freshman in high school. We were going to Tampa for the first time. It still had that surreal feeling. It doesn't have the kind of feeling it did in 2020 when you made the playoffs. It was more of like a holy cow, we're in the playoffs. This is like phenomenal. Can't believe this. This growing up, Clemson winning 10 games was a miracle type of thing. So Watson Renfro, big deal, and will always be in my mind as that top moment for just any time, any kind of sports. For you, what is that moment? And it can be anything. It doesn't have to necessarily be Clemson.
Yeah, it would. I mean, that would have to be at or near the top. I mean, as you can see behind me, I have photos of
Yeah.
most of the playoff press box settings, and they're right over here. Let's see, where's Tampa? Sorry, Tampa's over. Tampa is right here.
There we go. For our YouTube audience, you can kind of see the reflection of Larry's portraits and me in that portrait as well.
What's
But
that?
you can kind of
Oh,
see the no, you're good.
I just liked having. I took photos of the views from the
Yeah.
press box at each one just because I thought it was cool. Um, but no, that I mean that is just so. It really doesn't sink in until hours later. Like I'm on the bus from the stadium back to the media hotel at like you know 3 or 4 in the morning. And I'm getting texts from friends saying, "Man, Clemson fans who are like, I just cried reading your game
Oh,
story, game column." And it's like, wow, man, like I can't be a fan, of course, I just don't think that is possible when you're also trying to, you know, tell a story and to cover
yeah.
a team in to tell the truth, good or bad. But to say that I don't like look back and treasure those moments, and I don't in the moment that I'm not sitting there going, man, I am so lucky to be able to do this. Um, you know, because when I started covering Clemson, they were just. I mean, just getting to 10 wins seemed like a pipe dream. They were
Yeah.
just trying to get out of decades worth of mediocrity. And so a moment like that, I'm thinking, wow, man, how fortunate am I that I come along at the same time that this guy named Dabo Swinney comes along, one of the greatest stories in college football history, his
Mhm.
story, the way he got the job, the way he overcame all the odds when nobody thought he could, that he had a prayer uh, of 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 getting the job, and then not only bringing Clemson back to winning conference championships and being really good, but putting them on top of the college football world. Like, I know we're running out of time, but
Yeah, it's all good.
I think back to like the Florida State dynasty under Bobby Bowden. I always thought years ago when I was first starting out in the business, like, wow, man, how cool must it be to cover something like that, to be around that. And so when you're in the immediate aftermath of big moments like that in Tampa, or other assorted big moments that Clemson has had under Dabo Swinney, that's what I think about. Is like, man, I am able to witness and have a front row seat to this story, and so it's just gratitude for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, thank you so much for tuning into this interview with Larry Williams. You can check out his stuff at Clemson Rivals. I will link it all in the description. Consider subscribing. There's not a better time, especially with Clemson basketball on the rise and Clemson football. We're slowly getting to the spring. So, there couldn't be a better time to subscribe. And hey, maybe you'll see something from me at the future.
Yes, sir.
We'll
Yes,
see.
sir.
Thank you
We'll get
guys, as always,
there.
for listening to episode 112, guys. Crazy, of the Man with a Plan podcast. Hit all the buttons, subscribe, and have a great day. Take care.